guys, I know it has taken really long to upload this video, and I'm really excited about this video today, but also really nervous because it is so important. So this little series of videos that I've been doing that I feel is so incredibly important for healing has basically led up to this video. And this video will be on somatic experiencing, and I just want to make it very clear on what exactly this method will help you with. So whether you're suffering from any chronic condition in terms of health, no matter what it is, whether it be autoimmune disease, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, this method will help you with all of these chronic conditions, as well as any mental health conditions such as anxiety disorders, panic disorders, depression, even bipolar, schizophrenia. This method is going to help you resolve all of these issues, and it's going to help you take your healing into your own hands. So it's incredibly empowering, and I know it's a really big claim, but it does take a lot of work, and this method is also very subtle and it's very gradual, but you are in control of your own healing. And this is one of the main incredible things about this method, as well as so many other incredible things. So it's obviously a very vast topic, and I'm going to try and explain it the best way I can. I just want to put it out there that I am not an expert. I'm a patient. I'm using this method to heal myself too, and I'm actually in the process of it. And while I'm in the process of it, I'm learning as much as possible. I'm reading as much as possible. I'm watching as much content as possible, but I'm also working directly with a practitioner. So I'm just sharing what I understand from this method, and there's so many things that I learn daily, literally daily, about this method, and I have constant aha moments with this method and constant revelations. So I'm constantly evolving. So I'm not speaking from the perspective of a professional. I'm speaking from the perspective of a patient and what I've learned with this method so far and how it's helped me so far. So I'm going to try my best to explain in the most simple terms, keeping in mind that people watching this might know absolutely nothing about somatic experiencing, or they might know a bit about it. If you have had experience with somatic experiencing or somatic healing practices, please do leave comments below, and we would love your contribution. This community could really do with more perspectives and more contributions. So don't be shy, leave your experiences below. We'd love to hear from you. So as I said, I'm going to try and keep it simple, and I know that this video is going to be quite long. So I'm going to start off by listing my resources that I've been learning from, and I will do a longer video on these resources so that you know a little bit more about them and you know which ones to start with. But I'm just going to list a few resources to start with, and then you can go and do some research in your own time. So I'm going to show you some books that I've been learning from. I started off reading Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger, and Peter Levine actually developed this method, somatic experiencing. What I really like about this book is it explains the technicalities, it explains the reason why our nervous systems and our brains work the way they do, and it explains how we are designed. That's all I'll really say about that book. Obviously, I'm going to do a more in-depth video, but it's really incredibly interesting. All of these books are so interesting and so helpful. The next book that I read was When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate. I know I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly, but basically he is an MD and a researcher. He dedicated his life to researching trauma and the effect that trauma has on the body, and in particular childhood trauma, and how children who experience trauma within their childhoods grow up to develop chronic conditions. So that's really interesting. It also lists symptoms that can develop from chronic childhood trauma. So I really related to this book, and I found it incredibly insightful. The next book that I'm actually currently reading, I'm almost finished it, and it's a little bit tattered and torn, is this one, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I know I'm butchering these names, but this book is actually, it's been my favorite one. It has so much research. It is fascinating. I just highly, highly, highly recommend this book. They're all very important because they all explain different aspects of what I'm talking about today. But this one is my absolute favorite one. I just find it so fascinating. There's just so much evidence and so many case studies, and it's formed really a new passion for me. It's intrigued me. And I think that if you're watching this video, you'll probably be intrigued in the same way, because you'll probably be able to really relate to the book and the revelations that it contains that really relate to you and what you're going through. Then some Instagram resources. I really love the Instagram profile of Sarah Baldwin. She does little short videos that explain beautifully somatic experiencing and the importance of nervous system regulation. Irene Lyon, who I've mentioned before, she is so knowledgeable. She's studied this work for decades, so she's also always a really good resource. Then there's a profile called Awaken with Ali, and she mostly writes about somatic experiencing and nervous system regulation. And I love what she writes in her captions of her posts. It's very detailed, very educational, and very eye-opening. I highly recommend this profile too. And then there's also a practitioner that my personal practitioner recommended, and I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but I'll put it up on the screen, and it's Nicole Lossie, I think. She also has a YouTube channel, and Irene Lyon also has a YouTube channel with tons and tons and tons of information. So I highly recommend checking out Irene Lyon's YouTube channel too. That's actually where I discovered this method. And her YouTube channel is actually recommended to me by a brilliant CBT therapist here in Abu Dhabi, where I live. And I am so grateful that she directed me to this channel, because she said that she really thinks that cognitive behavioral therapy was not the perfect thing for me, because my problem was not within my thoughts and my frontal cortex, which is your thinking brain and your logical brain. It was within my body and my system, and it went so much deeper into my brain, and I was programmed to react in a panicky way or a frazzled way, but we'll get into that in this video. So I'm not going to go into my whole story because of time in this video, but I ended up with a really, really bad chronic illness, and I searched for answers. I did all the treatments. I was really trying to treat the infections and treat the health condition, but I found that nothing was really getting to the core of it. Even though I was making improvements, I found really let down by doctors. Even if they were really trying to help me, I felt really let down by those who were trying to help me around me. And so I eventually met a quantum healing practitioner, and through that year working with him, he really showed me how trauma has a direct effect on our bodies and our symptoms and our mental health and our brain chemistry, and as well as our behaviors. So working with him over that year, and it's something that you really have to experience for yourself, it showed me how it's linked to the problems that I was facing, no matter how severe they were. It was amazing to see how traumas had formed and shaped the way my body and brain reacts to even the smallest things. And yours does too. Everybody's does. And everybody has trauma, no matter whether you realize it or not. Some obviously more than others, but everybody has experienced a degree of trauma, abandonment, sadness during their lives, whether it's classified as a traumatic event or not. It could be a very small event that happened in your childhood, or even when you were a baby, too early for you to even remember. All of us have experienced some degree of trauma, and all of us have developed our nervous systems throughout our lives. And so we all react in certain ways to events that happen in our lives or small triggers. And this could be affecting our health, mental health, physical health, emotional health. So the important thing to remember, without getting into the science of it, is that our nervous system is a huge huge system that connects our brains, our hearts, our guts, and it has all these nerve endings and all these fibers, and it produces all these chemicals and hormones. So it's a massive part of our bodies and our systems and the way we function. And very importantly, our nervous systems are formed in order to protect us. So all of our nervous system reactions are there in order to ensure our protection and our survival. And our nervous systems are formed from when we are in the womb. So it goes all the way back to before we can remember, when we were in our mother's womb. Our nervous systems are shaped and formed from that time. And the way our mother is feeling and the way her nervous system is working affects the way our nervous system develops in the womb. And then once we are born and when we are babies, we are not able to regulate our own nervous systems. So when we are distressed and we're crying or we're hungry or needy, our primary caretaker, who is usually our mother, they are responsible for regulating our nervous systems. And this teaches us how to eventually self-soothe, as well as it starts to build our nervous system reactions in our body. So it's very interesting. If the primary caregiver cannot meet the needs of the baby's nervous system, this baby and child will develop unhealthy coping mechanisms and a dysregulated nervous system. And once again, these coping mechanisms are to protect us and to ensure our survival. So generational cycles repeat themselves in terms of whether our parents were regulated properly by their primary caregivers. And that will determine whether they have the capacity to give to their own children and to regulate their own children's nervous systems. So cycles continue. And by working on our nervous systems and teaching ourselves to react in different ways and showing our bodies that there are different ways to be, different ways to live, different states to live in, we can really break those generational cycles and make sure that our children have regulated nervous systems. So this work is incredibly important, and the wonderful news is no matter what it is that you are suffering with, whether it's a chronic condition or whether it's a mental health problem or an emotional problem, you can work on it, and you do have the power to make a change within your life. And a lot of people will say, oh no, well, it's genetic, my condition is genetic. But just remember that DNA can be activated and deactivated. Our bodies are so incredibly powerful. Our bodies are so incredibly intelligent. And when you get into this work, you realize just how intelligent our bodies truly are, and that we don't actually have to control it with our minds or our thoughts or anything. We just need to step out of the way and let our bodies do their thing. And obviously, we need to pay attention to our bodies and listen to what they're trying to tell us. And this is very much what somatic experiencing is about. So I wanted to find it in Gabor Mate's book about the symptoms that can develop from trauma, chronic trauma or shock trauma. So chronic trauma would obviously be an ongoing trauma, and then a shock trauma like a death of somebody or an accident or something like that. And in his book, he actually lists the symptoms that trauma can lead to, stored trauma in the body that has not been resolved. He lists the symptoms that this can lead to. And it's symptoms like fatigue, insomnia, muscle and joint pain. I'll leave the symptom list up on the screen. I couldn't find it in the book right now, but I'll leave it up on the screen. And then when I talk about the resources more in depth, I will talk more about that. But I really thought you guys would be able to relate to that. And he also speaks a lot in his books about how repressed emotion and trauma contributes to cancer, and this is based on research throughout his career. So it's very, very interesting, and what we are talking about today is very real and very powerful. So physical sensations, thought patterns, behaviors, and emotions are all triggered by the nervous system, and the nervous system influences all of these aspects of our being. So let's get into it more specifically about what this really means. So when we've experienced, for example, a chronic trauma throughout our childhood, so I'm going to give you an example. Say we have one parent who is abusive on a regular basis, or both parents are abusive on a regular basis, or you grow up with a narcissistic parent or a narcissistic sibling. These are just examples of a chronic trauma that you would have experienced throughout your childhood. Perhaps you were bullied at school, throughout your school experience. But the earlier in your childhood that this happens, the more effect it has, because this is when your nervous system is really developing. So that would be a chronic trauma. And I'm just going to try to explain how this will affect our body. So our nervous system has protective states, and it has a few different states. So we have our sympathetic state. And this state will include things like anxiety, frustration, panic, rage, fear, urgency, or terror. So it's a lot of energy in your body, and your adrenaline's pumping. This is when your adrenaline's pumping. And obviously this is to protect you, because if you're faced with a really threatening situation, especially back in the day when we were amongst lions and dangerous animals, we would need to run away, or we would need to fight off the threat. So this is pumped with adrenaline, pumped with energy, and emotions pop up during this state. It's urgent. It's a state to get us to take urgent action. So it's a protective state. Then we have our freeze state, which is another state of the nervous system. And this would include things like immobility. So you see this state actually functioning with animals in the wild. And you see animals playing dead until the threat has passed. And then they quickly get up and they run to a safe place. So when you're in this state of immobility, it's obviously a natural reaction. It's not something you think about. When there's a huge threat, and say you were in the wild and there was a huge threat and you couldn't run away, and you couldn't fight, you weren't strong enough to fight, you would completely just let go and shut down. That would be what your body would naturally do without you thinking about it. It's just a protective state, a protective mechanism that your body has built within it. It's amazing. But this state also includes the sympathetic energy inside. So you shut down on the outside, but you still have all this adrenaline on the inside, because when that threat has passed, you need to get up and you need to run. So I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this. You're shut down on the outside, but you have all this adrenaline on the inside. It's a very common state. And this state would kick in for somebody who is in a situation where there's an abusive parent chronically, because you're not able to escape that household as a child and you rely on your parents. So you have to make a plan to numb the pain, to protect yourself so that you don't just completely fall apart. So this protective mechanism is also very common in just humans in general, but especially people who have been through a chronic trauma. Then you have your dorsal shutdown state. And this nervous system state includes emotions such as depression and apathy, hopelessness and fatigue, and thoughts that usually start with, I can't. I can't do this today. I can't imagine myself ever healing. I can't even muster up the energy. I can't do it anymore. And I'm sure a lot of people who suffer with conditions such as chronic fatigue syndrome are very familiar with this state. And it's actually also a protective mechanism. Because, for example, if people have really hurt you in the past and caused trauma for you in the past, and then you've made plans to see people, or you have to go to a social event, your body will go into this state to protect you and say, I can't go. I don't want to go. It's to avoid situations that have been dangerous to you in the past, or you've perceived as dangerous, your body has perceived as dangerous in the past, or threatening. And so you shut down in order to protect yourself. So something that I also want to mention is that people who have been through such traumas and often find themselves going into these protective states are also prone to hypervigilance. So often we are hypervigilant, and this takes up a lot of energy. We're hypervigilant to make sure that this trauma and threat is not going to happen to us again, and is not going to put us into danger again, especially as adults. Now that maybe we're out of the situation, there are little things that start to remind us of the trauma. Subconsciously, we don't even notice it. Maybe loud noises, maybe bright lights, maybe too many people talking at once, or maybe even a relationship that we have in our lives. It will set off an alarm bell, and so this will send us into these protective states. So I just want you guys to know that if you find yourself in any of these states or behaviors or states of mind, or you catch yourself with these thoughts, it's actually very, very normal. It's all due to trauma that you've been through, and it's all actually an amazing coping mechanism that your body has in order to keep you alive and to keep you safe. So although you might not feel so well in these states, the priority is to survive. However, we can train our bodies to realize that it's not needed anymore. The trauma has passed. The threat has passed. We are safe. And that is the goal of somatic experiencing. But you have to do this very, very, very slowly, and slowly train and tweak your body to realize this and work with yourself, because obviously these protective mechanisms are on guard. They want to make sure that we are safe, and they have been trained this way since we were in the womb, or since our childhood, or since early on in our lives. So they're very strong and they're very potent. And so the work is very slow and gentle and gradual, but also very powerful. So let's talk a bit more about a shock trauma now, and how that may have affected our bodies and our nervous systems. Peter Levine's book explains how our brains are wired, and it talks about our primitive brains, and it talks about how we are designed to cope with traumas, shock traumas. So for example, in our primitive days, it would have been much easier to complete a trauma cycle and to integrate trauma, because we would have been faced with a threat. Say it was a dangerous animal, we would have been faced with that threat. Our nervous systems would have kicked in order to ensure our survival. We would have either succumbed to the threat and been killed, or we would have escaped the threat. And once we escaped the threat, we would have completed the cycle of trauma. So we would have run away when that sympathetic energy kicked in, or we would have shut down and played dead until the threat passes, and then we would have gone somewhere safe. And then we would have replayed the scenario and practiced for the next time such a scenario happens. And by doing this, by playing it out and practicing getting to safety and practicing new ways of dealing with it, naturally we start to integrate this trauma. But in today's day and age, with our modern stresses and our modern threats, we still have our primitive brains, but it's not as easy to complete the cycle. So often our trauma cycles are incomplete, and we still have that survival energy within our bodies. And often we are repeating traumatic experiences that have happened to us in the past without even realizing it. So I'm going to let you in on a personal example of mine, just so you understand a little bit more about what I'm saying. So for example, my father died of cardiac arrest, and he used to sometimes wake up at night screaming like, ah, ah. And he told me the reason why he woke up at night screaming like that was because his heart was racing. When he passed away, he was sleeping and he was screaming like that in his sleep. I was there at the moment, and I felt responsible for helping him, obviously. So I called the ambulance, and they took a very long time to get to him. In my mind, I knew that his heart had been racing, and then I discovered that he had passed of cardiac arrest, which means that he would have had a heart arrhythmia, or his heart would have just stopped for some reason. Maybe from some fluttering, maybe that's why he was shouting. So from that moment on, I used to get extremely bad heart flutters. Now, we were both bitten by ticks multiple times, so that could have obviously been a contributor. But usually people, when they get a heart flutter, they might be very scared and very uncomfortable. But for me, I would immediately want to call the ambulance. I would immediately go into absolute terror, be convinced that I'm dying, and call the ambulance. And this happened multiple times. And I would be very concerned with how quickly the ambulance can arrive and how close I am to a hospital. And this occupied a very significant portion of my thoughts and contributed to the heart racing. It actually made it a lot worse. So I had to process and deal with the fact that I was reenacting what my father had gone through and taking control of a situation that I felt I did not have control of in the past, because he passed away. It didn't end very well. It ended in extreme trauma. So I was reenacting the situation in order to redo it, and it's like a practice. So this does happen with animals in the wild. They reenact being attacked and escaping to safety, and this helps them to integrate the trauma. But I was not completing the trauma cycle. I was just re-traumatizing myself by going to the hospital and the doctors not being able to do anything or tell me anything. You know, they just said you're fine and sent me away. So that's just an example, but people reenact their traumas in various different ways, whether it's in a big dramatic way or whether it's in a small way. People tend to reenact their traumas, which is why people who were once abused often become the abusers if they haven't dealt with their traumas. And it doesn't mean they're a horrible person. It doesn't mean that they're in control of their behavior. It's a subconscious mechanism. It's built into our systems, and it's very complex. So I'm obviously not explaining all aspects of it, but it's very complex, and it's also extremely good news that we're able to work with it and resolve it and improve on ourselves and evolve. And by doing that, we can also improve our physical health, emotional health, and mental health. So as I said, when I refer to the nervous system, it's this huge system that connects the brain and the heart and the gut. And there's so much more to it as well. And you may have heard of neuroplasticity and methods that can retrain the brain and reshape the brain and rewire the brain, neural rewiring. And all of these methods are really helpful. And somatic experiencing also focuses on this area, neuroplasticity. But the brain is only one small part of a massive, complex nervous system. So when we are practicing somatic healing or somatic experiencing, we're not just working with the brain. We understand that the brain and chemical imbalances in the brain and mental health issues are actually connected to more areas of our body, and not just the physical. It's also connected to the emotional, it's also connected to the trauma. So this is an explanation of what I've been saying in my videos leading up to this on how trauma contributes to physical illness and mental health conditions. It's evidence-based, it's science-based, and it's research-based. It's not just some airy-fairy concept, it's real. And I'm not sure why it's not more widely known, but it's revolutionary because we can make changes. And it actually makes perfect sense the more you learn about it and the more you discover how the system works. Because small things can be perceived by our nervous system as a simple threat, such as chemicals, light, sound, movements, and even foods. And this is where chemical sensitivity and food sensitivities come in. And so many of us experience those. And we think that it's due to our chronic conditions, autoimmune diseases, but actually there's so much more to it. Yes, you do have a chronic condition, you do have an autoimmune disease, but there's so much more to it. It's not a medication that's going to be our answer. We have to go much deeper. We have to work on the nervous system level. We have to work on the trauma level. We have to learn to bring goodness back into our nervous system. We have to learn how to truly give our bodies a break for restoration and to truly restore our nervous system and our senses. And very importantly, we have to learn to re-establish a feeling of safety and security back into our bodies and our nervous systems. So how exactly do we do this? I highly recommend getting a practitioner in somatic healing or somatic experiencing, somebody who has a lot of experience, somebody who is very well recommended and highly esteemed, because this work is so intricate and so important. But I'm going to give you just an idea of how it works too, because I know that it sounds very vague because there's so many aspects to it. And, if you haven't really experienced it, it's quite difficult to understand it. But let me just explain from my experience what I've discovered, and I'll try to explain what needs to be done so that you have an idea. So in somatic experiencing, we curiously explore the internal landscape of our bodies, our sensations, our feelings, and we become aware of our body's experiences. And while we do that, we use tools to ensure that this experience isn't too overwhelming. Because a lot of the time, when we have a lot of trauma and repressed emotions that we've kept down for so long, this experience can be extremely overwhelming, and the physical sensations can become what seems to be life-threatening. So we could get like a lot of heaviness in our chest and shortness of breath and a racing heart and nauseous stomach and just feel completely overwhelmed. So we have tools to prevent that overwhelm. You may have experienced this type of overwhelm when doing things like meditating and you just feel really uncomfortable, or when you're trying to sleep and all of a sudden symptoms pop up and anxiety pops up and panic pops up, or even when you are sleeping, you might wake up with panic, or anxiety, or your heart racing, or you feel that you can't relax when you're trying to sleep. And this is all because of these repressed emotions and becoming overwhelmed when our focus is not on anything else, it's on our bodies, even if we don't intend it to be. When you're meditating or sleeping, you're not distracted by anything else. So we gently explore the sensations in our bodies and we listen to the language of our bodies. So we are finally giving our bodies a voice. We are finally paying attention to what our bodies are telling us it needs so that we can work together to heal. Because symptoms are just a way of our bodies speaking to us and telling us what they need. Sometimes we become nauseous and our stomach feels sore because we're hungry. Sometimes our throats are so dry and we're fatigued because we're thirsty. For example, those are very simple examples, but our body speaks to us in very complex ways, and we just need to really give it the attention. But we do this in quite a specific way in somatic experiencing. So we throw all our preconceived ideas out the door because our body has its own unique language that may not have words in the English language, or may not have ways to describe our sensations in our perceived conscious experience. So we may find that the way our body is communicating to us a bit weird or strange. And it may not seem to make sense at first, but it always does make sense. It always does make sense. So I always find in my sessions that I say to my practitioner, she might say, "What are you feeling?" And I might say, "This might sound a bit weird, but I feel like hot air in my body." And she says, "No, it doesn't sound weird at all. That's your experience. That's what your body is experiencing." So that's just an example. It might seem a bit weird at first, but the way our bodies communicate to us is not in a straightforward manner that we are used to or we consciously can explain to somebody else. It's specific and it's unique to us and it's subtle, but also very strong. It's a combination of the stored emotions and traumas and all the ways that they physically manifest and alert us from our whole life's experience. So we can't possibly remember the experiences that triggered this feeling. For example, if you were bullied, you might have a knot in your throat and a knot in your stomach and a sensation that comes up from your stomach all the way up to your head and makes you feel frazzled, for example. And when these sensations come up in our bodies during somatic experiencing that have been stored due to our experiences, we might not remember the trauma that they originate from, or the traumas that they originate from. It might be an accumulation of traumas, but we don't have to remember. Our body keeps the score. And by dealing with these sensations, paying attention to them, listening to the language of our bodies, that's how we can start to transform and make a change. So when we go a little bit deeper into our sensations, we start to really focus in on whether the sensation has a color, whether it has a shape, whether it has a quality. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it fuzzy? Is it mushy? Is it soft? Is it muddy? Is it dense? Is it hard? We try to really identify it as much as possible. And this could, I'm going to give you some examples. So you could say, oh, the back of my head is so tight. It feels like it's a steel bar. It feels like balls of steel. Or you might get images that pop up. So there could be imagery that pops up. So you could say, my body feels so full. It feels so full of hot, dense air. And it feels so uncomfortable. But obviously it will be different for everybody. There are so many thousands, maybe even millions of different sensations or perceptions. Maybe it has a texture, maybe it vibrates. We really want to get to know these sensations very well and very intimately so that we can befriend them and become familiar with the way our body reacts, the way our system works, the way we have developed sensations within our nervous systems in order to cope with what life has to throw at us. We really get to know ourselves for the first time. So this truly begins to form an understanding of how our bodies and our systems are working internally. And we truly begin to understand ourselves. And then from there, we build capacity within our systems. And we make changes by slowly showing our bodies that there is a different way that we can react, and there are different ways to keep us safe. So for example, I might have this clenching at the back of my head, and I might think, okay, it's like a steel bar and it's so hard and it's stuck there. And then I show my body, okay, I'm safe. Maybe we never force our bodies. We always invite, we always give an invitation and just show our bodies that there is a different way, that it can be. It does not have to be, but it can be. So I say maybe, just maybe it can melt away a little bit. Maybe it can melt away a little bit and still be safe. I can still be safe and secure and grounded. And I can still feel a sense of security within my body without having this clenching reaction. So this work is loving and gentle, and we simply invite ourselves to explore other alternatives, and we simply invite ourselves to rewire and to eventually, hopefully, be different and react differently and form different sensations and different reactions. And also we bring in the good sensations, and we begin to learn to notice what is happening in our bodies when we are feeling things that are good, and when we are feeling relaxed, or when we are doing something that we're enjoying. We begin to really also notice this so that we can learn to bring goodness into our nervous systems. And we can learn to then pull up this goodness and regulation and sense of peace and sense of freedom when we really need it. So we learn to use our internal resources to introduce ourselves to new ways of being. So what does safety feel like to you? Where is it located in your body? What quality does it have? Does it have a shape? Does it have a color? What is the sensation? And once you really can establish what safety and what joy and security feels like within you, you then have that resource to pull up on in times when you really need it. Somatic experiencing also involves listening to our body's basic needs. So in our everyday lives, we tend to ignore our body's basic needs, such as when our body alerts us that it's thirsty, that we need the toilet, that it's hungry. Often we say, okay, we just need to do this one thing and then we'll go to the toilet, or we just need to quickly finish this and then we'll have something to eat, or then we'll have something to drink. But we really prioritize what our body's needs are in somatic experiencing. And this also involves setting aside stressful situations and really trying to give yourself that grace to eliminate as much stress from your life as you can, and really give your body an alternative and treat yourself really well. So somatic experiencing really truly teaches us how to care for ourselves and how to love ourselves. And that's something that I really love about somatic experiencing, because you always hear healers or coaches saying, you just need to love yourself. You need to vibrate in a vibration of gratitude and that will heal you. Or you just need to raise your frequency and be in a loving state and that will heal your body. But somatic experiencing teaches you what this really means. Because when people used to tell me, you need to feel joy and love and be in a good state and your cells will follow, I thought, but what does that mean? How do I even get there? I don't even know where to start. But somatic experiencing really is the practical work and the building blocks to what that really means and entails. It also involves rewiring our brains by changing our wording. For example, you might say, I'm a very anxious person. I feel overwhelmed. I feel so angry. And we change that type of wording to, a part of me feels anxiety. A part of me feels frustrated. A part of me feels overwhelmed. A part of me feels very fatigued. And in this way, we can create some distance between ourselves and what we are feeling. And we realize that it's just a passing sensation, a passing emotion that we may feel very often, but it's not something that has to stay with us. And it's not something that defines us. We even reframe how we tell people of our experience. So we might say, I'm thinking that I'm dying. We reframe that to, I'm having that thought again. I'm experiencing that thought again. Because then we realize that this is a thought that commonly passes through our brain. And I'm going to do an exercise with you in an upcoming video on how we can deal with those types of thoughts that we so often have when we have a scary illness. So please do follow along on this series for more tools and more empowering techniques that will really help you to rewire your brain and rewire your system. And then something that's also very important about somatic experiencing, and it's something that practitioners really focus on, and that is being present and really attuning to you during your sessions. And this is something that our primary caregiver is responsible for when we're a baby. And it's one of the main basic needs that need to be met when we're babies, is having somebody really attuned to us. And this means when a baby is frustrated and maybe it like pulls your hair and it's really frustrated. This is actually an example that Irene Lyon used on her channel. Often parents get angry back at their baby and they get frustrated back at the baby for behaving that way, when really the baby just needs to be met and comforted. It's expressing a need. So it needs to be mirrored. It's called mirroring in somatic experiencing. And it's basically to meet those basic human needs of feeling heard, understood, and supported. And this helps us to develop a healthy nervous system. It's very important. But even as adults, we need to feel heard, understood, and supported. I find it so interesting in Gabor Mate's book how he talks about a study where females with breast cancer had a better chance of survival and recovery when they were surrounded by a support system or a community. And this is because their nervous systems would have been regulated in that situation, and they would have had that soothing that we so badly need, our systems so badly need. So having a safe person to really attune to us is very important. And that's what somatic experiencing practitioners focus strongly on doing for their clients during sessions. I personally also choose to have somebody with me during the day when my husband goes to work, just to help me with daily tasks so that I'm not overwhelmed, and just so that I can feel that sense of support. If I need somebody to talk to, if I need somebody to go on a walk with, if I need to feel that sense of support, I have somebody there. And that has really helped in my healing. It's surprising and it's something so simple, but it's really helped in my healing. So if you think about it, when we used to grow up in communities or villages, and they say it takes a village to raise a child. It's actually so true. You know, we were surrounded by strong women. We were surrounded by support. We knew that we had somebody to rely on if we needed it. And I live in a different country to my family and friends, so I do think that that contributed to my illness and deterioration. So since I've had that support system in place, it's really done wonders for my nervous system. So that's something important, and that's something that you can do if you are able to. Because even as adults, we need soothing, because our nervous system doesn't know the difference between past and present. So often when we're experiencing a chronic illness, it's because our nervous system is literally still stuck in the trauma. It still thinks that the threat is there. It's still responding to the threat. So it's no wonder that we're exhausted, because our bodies are working so hard to protect us on a constant basis. So we need that soothing, we need that support while we are rewiring our brains and training ourselves to regulate and learning how to self-regulate. We need to give our bodies what they need really for that support, and we need to listen to our bodies. If you feel like you don't want to be alone, or you're really scared to be alone, that's a signal. So we make changes according to the messages that our bodies are giving us. And we really prioritize these changes if we want to heal. So I just want to end off with a little story about my practitioner that I'm with, when I was explaining to her an experience that I went through. So after one of our first sessions, we had really gone inside of my body, and it obviously scared my nervous system being vulnerable, because vulnerability is one of the scariest things for our nervous system, because it's there to protect us. So when we are vulnerable and we're doing things a bit differently, our nervous system really kicks in. And once we've dealt with one part of our nervous system reaction, another one might come in to really protect us, you know. So it was after one of our first sessions, and I had released a lot of anger that I was harboring, and that evening my heart started to really race, and I started to panic, and I told Ross, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die, I need to get to the hospital, and it was a horrible experience. My heart rate went so high, my blood pressure was so high. And I was telling my practitioner about it in our next session. And I said, when I arrived at the hospital, they told me that there was nothing wrong. And there was actually nothing wrong. And I can't believe it, because it felt so real. It felt like my heart was about to fail. It was so crazy and so physical. And she said to me, I'm just going to correct you gently there. There actually was something wrong. It's not that there was nothing wrong. Maybe the doctors didn't pick it up, but there was something wrong. Your nervous system is attempting to complete a cycle of trapped trauma, and that is a big deal. Our nervous system is there for us to survive, so it's always extremely urgent. It's always an urgent call to action, and it's always severe, the symptoms and the thoughts and the experience. So yes, there was something wrong, and it's not just anxiety. It was your body trying to complete and deal with a trauma, and that's a lot. That's a lot to deal with. It's a lot of work, and it's a very scary experience, and we're going to learn to complete that cycle safely and resolve our symptoms and our trauma in doing so. And that was very comforting to hear. And I'm going to end off the video with another thing that my practitioner always says, and I just think it's so beautiful, because I always tell her, wow, what you are doing for me is so powerful. I'm so grateful to you. I've come such a long way, and I did not know that this work even existed. And she says, I always say that I'm healing the world one nervous system at a time. And I think that is just such a beautiful thing to say, because it's so simple, but so profound and so true. So that is my aim, to give this gift back to the world that I have been given, and to help heal the world one nervous system at a time. So if you would like to see more, please do subscribe to this channel and keep watching and following along this healing journey. As I learn more, we learn from each other, we help each other, and we give that gift to the world. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.